Welcome to the deep dive. You know, a few weeks ago, Fortune magazine ran this headline that, while it fundamentally misunderstood how artificial intelligence works in 5 words or less.
My very impactful words, yeah.
Exactly. The headline was, Anthropic leaks its own AI. And if you're just scrolling through your daily feed, you probably absorb that sentence, log it away under the whole rogue AI category, and just move on with your day.
Right, which is exactly the problem.
It is, because today we're going to show you why the artificial intelligence in that specific scenario didn't actually do anything at all, and why the real culprit is this massive systemic structural failure that the tech industry is, honestly, they're desperately trying to ignore it.
We're basing this on a really deeply analytical piece by Dr. Erickson Katz. It's titled Guilty by Syntax. Fortune's Anthropic headline was built to mislead.
Such a great title, honestly.
It really is.
Yeah.
And Katz uses this single headline to expose a critical blind spot in how we think about AI safety. So the foundational premise we have to establish for you today is that the literal vocabulary we use to describe an event, it dictates how we engineer the solution to it.
Right. If you name the wrong problem, you build the wrong fix.
Exactly. If we use the wrong words, we diagnose the wrong problem entirely. And right now, our language is actively hiding the fact that the human-built infrastructure surrounding these models is, well, it's quietly buckling under pressure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the bigger structural failure, we kind of have to look at the immediate trigger first, which is the headline itself.
Right, the syntax of it.
Yeah. Anthropic leaks its own AI coding tool. When I read that, the syntax just immediately paints a picture, you know?
Huh.
It uses this very active verb, leaks.
It positions the AI as the actor.
Exactly. It reads as if this complex machine learning model just woke up, stretched its digital arms, and actively made a choice to expose its internal tools to the public internet.
Which implies agency. And, I mean, this is Katz's core critique. We have this deep-seated psychological tendency to anthropomorphize complex systems.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when those systems talk to us in natural language.
Right. We want a clear, intentional actor to blame when things go wrong. We want a villain.
Mm-hmm.
But Katz provides a really necessary mechanical reality check here. The model didn't leak a single thing.
It literally didn't make a choice.
Not at all. What actually happened was that a release pipeline exposed artifacts that were just never meant to be packaged for public distribution in the first place.
I think we need to pause and actually define the mechanics of that. Because for anyone listening who works in software development, the phrase release pipeline exposing artifacts probably just triggered a very specific kind of migraine.
Oh, yeah, the DevOps nightmare.
Yeah, because we aren't talking about archaeological artifacts here. In the context of CI/CD, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment, an artifact is essentially just a byproduct of the software build process.
It's the output.
Right. It could be a compiled binary, maybe a specific configuration file, or in the case of AI, it could be a specialized staging environment or a system prompt. It's basically just blaming a car's engine for deciding to drive off a cliff when the reality is the factory mechanic simply forgot to install the brakes.
That's a great way to put it. And what's fascinating here is why this distinction is so incredibly vital. This is where headlines start creating way more noise than signal.
Because we're pointing the finger at the engine.
Exactly. When you misattribute agency to the machine, you completely misdiagnose the failure. The pipeline is the automated assembly line, right? It takes the raw code from the developers, runs it through a gauntlet of tests, builds these artifacts, and deploys the product.
And that pipeline has specific filters, security checks.
Right. Checks designed to ensure that internal development artifacts do not get bundled into the public release. So in the Anthropic incident, the AI model was simply existing within its environment. It was the delivery mechanism, the pipeline itself, that failed to filter out the internal tool.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. Look at this from the outside. If I'm just a casual observer or, an investor trying to keep up with the daily flood of tech news, my first instinct is absolutely going to be to blame the shiny new technology.
Sure, it's the unknown variable.
Right. If the AI is involved and it's this unpredictable thing, isn't it just a natural conclusion to question the safety of the model itself when something unexpected hits the internet? Why shouldn't we question the tech?
Well, it is a logical leap, I'll give you that,
Yeah.
but it's a really dangerous one because it leads to what Katz calls the flattening of the narrative.
Flattening of the narrative, I like that.
Yeah, the nuance of the complex DevOps failure just gets entirely stripped away, and the event gets flattened into these lazy, repeatable media narratives, another AI failure, another rogue model.
Another reason to question the technology.
Precisely. And when you interpret a pipeline failure as a failure of the core intelligence, you are entirely blinded to the actual structural weakness. You
Yeah.
basically start trying to fix a ghost.
Oh, wow, yeah. You spend all your engineering hours, all your regulatory capital trying to constrain the model's behavior. You try to teach the math not to leak things.
Which is absurd, right?
It's completely absurd because the math didn't execute the deployment protocol. The human-built pipeline did.
And while you are distracted interrogating the model, the broken release mechanism is left completely untouched, just waiting to fail again. If we view these as isolated events of quote-unquote model behavior, we miss the emerging patterns of structural weakness.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we are busy patching these isolated leaks and blaming the models, if the model's behavior isn't the real issue, then what is the actual culprit behind these recurring headlines?
Well, Katz argues this is fundamentally a crisis of system governance under acceleration.
System governance under acceleration. Let's break that down.
Sure. To understand the mechanics, we have to look at the two distinct layers of modern tech companies right now. On one layer, you have the AI models themselves.
The engine.
Right. And these systems are scaling exponentially. They're getting faster, more capable, they're ingesting vastly more context, and they're being integrated into incredibly complex real-world workflows at a blistering pace.
And then on the other layer, you have the governance, the human-built validation pipelines, the QA processes, the oversight mechanisms, the scaffolding around the engine.
Exactly. And here's the massive structural gap Katz points out. The scaffolding is not evolving exponentially. In many cases, it's growing linearly, or it is entirely stagnant.
So we are essentially strapping a supersonic jet engine onto a wooden bicycle frame.
Yes, that's exactly what we're doing.
The engine works perfectly fine, but the frame is just shaking itself apart because it was never built to handle that kind of speed.
The exponential growth in the capability of the system is completely outpacing the mechanisms designed to govern it. And Katz uses a really critical phrase here about what happens in that widening gap. He notes that in this gap, small errors stop being local. They propagate.
They propagate, meaning they spread.
Right. The control mechanisms are fundamentally struggling to keep up with the systems they're supposed to govern, so a small error isn't caught. It slips through and multiplies.
Which makes sense because the friction isn't just about raw speed, right? It's about a fundamental mismatch in the actual architecture of these systems. We are forcing non-deterministic technology through deterministic pipelines.
Yes. That is the core technical friction.
Let's actually explain that for the listener, because the difference between deterministic and non-deterministic systems, it's basically the hidden key to why these pipelines are shattering. So traditional software deployment, the stuff these pipelines were originally built for, is deterministic.
Meaning, if you provide a specific input, you will always get the exact same output.
Right. If a developer writes a script that says 2 + 2, the CI/CD testing pipeline checks to ensure the output is 4.
It either passes or it fails. It's binary. You can build these rigid, highly effective automated guardrails for that kind of software.
But large language models are non-deterministic. They operate on probabilistic logic. You can give an LLM the exact same prompt 10 times and get 10 slightly different variations of an answer.
So how do you build a deterministic QA pipeline for a non-deterministic entity?
You really can't.
No, you can't. The industry is currently trying to shove these highly dynamic, unpredictable AI models through legacy deployment pipelines that were engineered to test binary software updates. The validation checks are essentially looking for a standardized shape, but the AI's output is constantly shifting.
And when you combine that architectural friction with the sheer speed at which these companies are pushing updates just to stay competitive, the guardrails inevitably fail. Artifacts slip through. Internal tools get exposed.
And then, like we said, the error propagates. In traditional linear software, a small error might just crash a local machine. The damage is contained. But we are no longer building linear systems.
Right. We are building these highly integrated, nonlinear AI ecosystems. So an oversight and a validation check doesn't just result in a minor glitch anymore.
Not at all.
If a pipeline accidentally exposes an internal coding tool, that error is immediately absorbed into a wider network. An LLM integrated into a backend might just autonomously pull that exposed artifact, feed it into another automated system, and suddenly you've cascaded bad data out to thousands of users before a human engineer even gets an alert.
The interconnected nature of the system acts as an amplifier. What we're seeing in the news is not the intelligence of the machine failing. It is our legacy control structures buckling and allowing errors to cascade at unprecedented speeds.
Which brings us to how we are currently trying to fix this and why it's completely failing. Now that we see this massive gap between AI acceleration and governance, we have to look at the trap the industry is falling into. Katz warns about the local response trap.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the local response trap is the fatal flaw in how we are handling these incidents.
Because we're still reading them as isolated events.
Exactly. A company issues a PR statement saying, we found the bug, they patched the specific release, they fixed the one broken process, and they just move on.
They tape up the single shattered wheel on the wooden bicycle and pretend they aren't still attached to a supersonic jet.
They're treating the symptom, not the disease. The fatal flaw here is that we are applying yesterday's control assumptions to systems that no longer behave in linear, predictable ways.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, if these systems aren't linear anymore and the pipelines are fundamentally mismatched, how should we be thinking about the next AI failure we see in the news?
Well, Katz comes to a pretty chilling conclusion. The structural reality is that the issue isn't whether incidents like the Anthropic exposure will happen again. It's that they are structurally likely to.
Structurally likely, that is a heavy phrase.
It is. But we have to be clear, they are not structurally likely because AI itself is inherently malicious or unsafe. They are structurally likely because the human-built systems wrapped around the AI are no longer stable under the extreme speed at which they are being pushed.
It fundamentally rewires how you consume the news, doesn't it? Think about the incredible journey we just took on this deep dive.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
We started by looking at 5 simple words in a Fortune headline. Anthropic leaks its own AI. On the surface, it's just another piece of daily tech noise. But by analyzing what Katz calls the guilty syntax, we completely moved past the illusion of the autonomous machine.
Right, we looked past the phantom agency.
And we uncovered this massive structural governance gap hiding in plain sight. You know now to look past the syntax. You know to question the release pipelines and the oversight rather than the AI's supposed agency.
Because true knowledge comes from interpreting the pattern behind the event, not just reacting to the event itself. When you learn to spot these false media narratives, you stop getting distracted by the wrong problems. You focus on the failing infrastructure, which is really the only place where meaningful solutions can be implemented.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to really mull over on your own. Katz showed us that these failures are structurally likely right now because governance is breaking down under the current speed of development.
The current speed, yes.
So ask yourself this. If yesterday's control assumptions are already failing to contain today's AI, what exactly is going to happen to these fragile oversight pipelines when the immense financial and competitive pressures of the market force these tech companies to accelerate even faster tomorrow?
The conveyor belt is only going to speed up.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the headlines, and we will catch you next time.